Hey y'all, how are you doing? So today I'm going to be going through and just reviewing some units. I put a poll in the poll section. If you guys could go answer that really quickly, that would be awesome. I think that it looks like all three of you have, this is a pretty low population stream, which means I will be able to help you and answer your questions more quickly. So I guess I should have done this earlier, but if you can see me and hear me and see my slides, please put like where you're from in the comments. I'm from Dallas, Texas. So where I am, it is 11 a.m. And on the West Coast, if you're from LA, I guess it's 9 a.m. So some of you are probably still asleep. If it looks like I just woke up, it's probably because I did. Don't know why I signed up for daytime streams. Guess just to help you guys. I was feeling nice. Can y'all hear me? Can anybody tell me in the comments that they hear me? Good, thank you. All right, so hey, Molly, Spencer, and T. Spencer, you're from Washington. Where are you from, T and Molly? Before I get started here. Dallas, Texas. Whoa, that's a lot of Texans in the house. All right, so Spencer, I guess you're the odd one out from Washington. So I guess we can just get started then. So today it's going to be a more informal stream. I'm not going to go through PowerPoint slides like a usual stream would be, but I do still have a few slides, like an outline, I guess, kind of. All right, so I'll get started. So this is the weekly stream calendar, and it's right, but it does not include all of the daytime streams they're doing. Now that coronavirus has, stopped all the schools, everybody's moving to online learning. So Fiveable is adding a lot more daytime streams. So look at the AP Human Geography section on the website, app.fiveable.me, and there are a ton of daytime streams for all AP subjects. And if you're involved in anything else, then watch those streams too. Last night, I did AP Environmental Science streaming. 2 nights ago, I did the Tuesday night AP Human Geography weekly stream. So I hope you guys tuned into that, learned something new about, globalization and urbanization. All right. As always, follow Think Fiveable on all of your favorite social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All right, so welcome to my office hours. So I already put a poll in the comments, and it looks like there are 3 units that I'm going to go through and review right now: population, culture, and political geography. So I'm going to go in the order that they were voted on because that's when I added the outlines to my slides. So the first one is going to be political geography. Next, we have Unit 2, population and migration. And our third unit to review will be culture. That's just the order that people got into the stream and voted in my polls, so that's the order that I'll go. First come, first serve, right? So let's get into it. Political geography. Political geography is one of the biggest units in AP Human Geography. It has it actually, I think, has the most information that you have to learn. Oh, this is kind of not a great slide layout, but I'm going to be talking you through everything that's on here. So my first bullet point of the outline is what's a nation, what's a state? So a nation is something that's a group of people that identify by a common characteristic. So I can be a nation with my native Texans because we all love brisket barbecue and we all speak the howdy y'all, welcome to Texas y'all, we're the friendly state language, right? So we can identify like that as a nation. And a state is something that we would think of in normal life, not in AP Human Geography, like a country. So the state would be like the United States. We could call our state Texas. France is a state. Great Britain is a state. It doesn't have to be anything by a common characteristic. You just have to live in a set area, a set amount of land that is your state. And once we get into defining nations and state, what if they mix? Well, we got a multinational state. So a multinational state, that's like almost every country in the world at this point, really. A multinational state is where you have multiple nations living in one state. So that could be like the USA. We're known as the great melting pot here in the United States of America. There are tons of different cultures and what we'd call nationalities in AP Human Geography. So that could be a nation state. Another nation state would be Turkey because they have the Turks living in it, but they also have Ottomans, which is an old country, the Ottoman Empire, people who still identify with those views. but then they also have the Kurds, which are a stateless nation. And a stateless nation just means you're a nation and you're like a really tight nation. Like you can all identify with each other. The Kurds are one of the biggest examples. They live across the Middle East around Turkey, Iran, Iraq, that area on like the eastern part of Turkey, and they've been wanting their own state for forever now. Palestinian is a stateless nation. They don't have an officially recognized UN state. They live in Israel, but they want their own territories. So they've been protesting for a long, long time now to try to be able to have their own state since it's its nation. Like they're completely different than the Israel was made for the Jewish people, but they are Arab Muslims, and they've been trying to get their own state because they have a completely different ethnicity, they have a completely different nationality, they have a different religion, and you can see that religion and ethnicity are going to start a lot of conflicts that we see in the global scene. If you have any questions or if I'm going too fast, please say something in the comments. Please stop me. If you just want to say something, ask me a question, put that in the comments too. This whole thing is just to go through, answer your questions, review some things from your units. All right, so we're going to talk about the multi-state nation. I skipped that one, I'm sorry. So multi-state nation is where there are multiple states in one nation. So that could also be like the Kurds or the Palestinians because, well, not really the Palestinians, but the Kurds, because they're a nation living in multiple states. They're in Turkey, they're in Iraq, they're in Iran. It's one nation that's living in multiple states. And then next we have the modern nation state. So the modern nation state is basically when we have one nation and one state. It's a great concept and it doesn't happen a lot in reality. The biggest examples of nation states that they talk about on the AP Human Geography exam are usually going to be Japan, sometimes Germany, sometimes Brazil. I think that my book here, so if you guys have any questions, I definitely have a book to reference because I did AP Human Geography last year and got a 5 on the exam. So woohoo for me, but it's definitely been a year, so I've had to look a few things up. So this book, this is actually, I totally recommend using Fiveable, but this book, I don't know if you can see it, ASAP Human Geography by the Princeton Review. It is such a great review book. Like I hated reading the textbook. And tomorrow I have another stream giving all of you guys my tips and how I prep for the AP exam for AP Human Geography. Tomorrow again at 11 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. West Coast Time to talk about giving you all of my tips on how I prep for the exam, all of my steps and how I got a 5 and how you guys can get 5s too. And it looks like I have a question before I keep moving on. Can you please explain the Israel-Palestine conflict? So T is asking if I can explain the Israel-Palestine conflict. Honestly, it's one of the most intricate, most complicated conflicts in the world. Basically, what it boils down to is Palestine has been a state and a nation since like the beginning of time. They were the Arabs living on the west coast of the Mediterranean Sea. During World War II, what happened was when all of the Jews in Europe were displaced because of Hitler's Holocaust and Nazi regime, they all didn't have any place to go because the Nazis had destroyed all their homes. The UN decided to make this place called Israel, which was the Jewish homeland in Jerusalem. So the UN carved out this state, which was really not owned by anybody at the time. The Palestinians kind of identified with that as their like area, but it wasn't a real defined state. So basically the UN plopped all the Jews from their refugee camps after World War II into Israel, that land area. And they just decided to name it, you know what, that's a country now. So after all these Jews came in, there were all these Palestinians, which are Arab Muslims. So they didn't like all these Jews who had completely different ideas, races, nationalities, ethnicities coming in and just taking their land because I don't know if you know anything about religions, but Jerusalem and Israel are the homeland for the 3 main Abrahamic religions. So you have Islam, you have Judaism, and you have Christianity that all say that they have their homeland in this one little town of Jerusalem in Israel. So it's a really complicated conflict. It goes back really many years. It's been going on since the beginning of time. Basically, Israeli Jews and Arab Palestinians Muslim, Arab, Palestinians don't like each other, and they're fighting to have like their own land. The Palestinians want to carve out certain territories from Israel that they think belong to them, and it's just caused a lot of fighting over the years. Like, I've read a ton of articles and reports on it, but I honestly still don't understand. I just know that it's the two religions fighting. It's been a conflict in that region for decades. Nobody's tried to get involved because they both just use awful guerrilla tactics. It's not fun. It's also not a very safe part of the world to travel to, so I would not do that if I were you. But moving back into political geography. And also, now I was just talking about Israel and Palestine, that can tie back to the cultural unit, because we talk about cultural conflicts and religions. So the Abrahamic religions, which originated from that Israel area and Jerusalem, those Abrahamic religions all come from the same roots, but they all have slightly different, well, not slightly, but some of them have very different beliefs. So those cultures and those religions, which is an important part of the culture unit, all believe that they have different views. And I'm sorry, we got a new viewer. Welcome in, Valeria. If you want to go vote in my polls, I can help tailor the session to you. If you have any questions, please put anything you have in the comments. That'd be awesome. All right, I'm going to keep moving. So back to political geography. So impacts of colonial, oh, I didn't even finish the modern nation state. This is kind of all over the place. Like I said, it's informal. So this book, ASAP Human Geography, it's like $8 on Amazon. I totally recommend buying it. It's so much more interesting to read than a textbook. Like, it has all these fun pictures, diagrams, and it tells you what you like actually need to know for the exam. This is one of my biggest study materials. Like, it's even in a fun font that's easy to read. So I would totally recommend it if you wanted to buy a prep book to help you for the exam. So this book says that Brazil was a nation state because all of these different tribes from the African slaves that came over in the colonial era and the Portuguese that settled there and had the land, they've all created a national identity of being Brazilian with their national sport history and identity. And the government also has really one major political view. So it's a nation state. It has multiple political parties. It's not communist, but it has one major political party, one major ideology, one national identity, one national sport that they all love, football or soccer, as we call it here in America. And they're mostly Portuguese or of African descent. It's like Afro-Portuguese or something like that. It's really weird, but it's a nation state. That in Japan. Japan has like almost always been a nation state. They come from the Edo samurai warriors. They've all been living in Japan, which is one tiny island that actually holds a lot of power in the world scale for a long time. So Japan is definitely one of the biggest examples of a nation state. They actually have very strict immigration policies. Like, there's a lot of debate right now going on because a lot of places are on lockdown, but Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is still doing raids on many office buildings and homes because people are on lockdown. There's debate about that in the U.S., and we think that we have strict immigration policies in the U.S. But if you try to immigrate to places like Australia and Japan, like, even if you're like a rich American, like, they don't do immigration there. Like, you can try and seek refuge in those places, but places like Japan and Australia, like, we don't even think about that, but they don't do immigrants there. Just a little anecdote from history and what's going on right now, tying human geography back to current events. Political geography, the impacts of colonialism. So basically, as I was talking about World War II a few minutes ago, World War II, before that, what caused it was in the early 1900s, after the Industrial Revolution had happened, all of these countries wanted to go show their power, flex their muscles, and go get all of these colonies in Africa and Asia. So after World War II, what happened was a process called decolonization. So all of these countries were freed from their German, British, and French owners, mostly besides in the Caribbean, because that just never happened. In Africa, places like Sudan that were a British colony at one point were freed by the US and the Soviet Union after the World War II. And these African colonies still have some of their European policies put in place, like the British in Sudan. They still have local tribes that are named after British places. And also the European countries really made the African colonies like follow their ways of practicing things. So that's why we got a lot of Christianity in Africa, because it spread from Europe. And these places really still have government practices, government buildings that were modeled after the Europeans, like especially in Sudan and the British, and their capital of, I think it's like Kandahar, I think, in Sudan. They have a lot of British architecture in their buildings. So they still practice a lot of British ways of thinking, really. All right, so the types of boundaries. So there are two types of boundaries. Internal, which are like inside of a country. So like here in the US, we have a border for, I think there are two people on the stream from Texas right now. Like we have a border between Dallas County and Tarrant County. We have borders between Los Angeles County and Orange County in California. So I don't know any counties in Washington, but we also have borders inside of the US between states, Texas, Oklahoma, Washington, Oregon. And then we have international boundaries. So we have boundaries that are countries between places like Washington and British Columbia, Canada, in Vancouver. Very pretty city, by the way. But then we also have international boundaries that are called DMZ, demilitarized zones. So the most major DMZ in the world right now is between North and South Korea. So there's about a 30-mile long stretch where nobody goes besides military officers between North and South Korea, because they've been fighting since the Korean War over who gets what land once Korea broke up into two countries, the communist North and the democratic South. When they broke up, they've been fighting over who gets what land. So really, nobody goes in the DMZ, because like if you go in there, you can get shot. Like no country owns it, but they both defend it like crazy. If you cross over what they think is their boundary, like you can get shot on sight. Demilitarized zones are very dangerous types of international boundaries. Just wanted to add that for you. Giving examples in human geography always helps you to review. I know for many of you, well, there are only 3 of you on this stream. So for all 3 of you, this might be your first AP course that you've ever taken. So you don't know like how much you need to look for examples of things in real life, make connections in history to all of the different concepts you're learning, because when you go to the test, you have no clue what unit your FRQs are going to be. You can have an FRQ that's from Unit 7, another one from Unit 5, and then another one that's on political geography, and you need to like describe or explain or use a historical example to defend your reasoning on something. So if you can make connections and remember certain things, like, oh, this is a allocational boundary dispute that I'm seeing in the news right now. If you ever have an FRQ about that, then you'll know exactly what you can write about. That's why I'm adding all of these into this office hour session, because I'm going through and reviewing these units very on the surface to add in a few examples. So if you remember a few things from the session, hopefully it can help you on your exam, which for right now, according to College Board, are still happening. So next we have territorial morphology. So this, I can tell you that this is not the hardest like concept in political geography. So it's just basically looking at the shapes of states. It's just a fancy word for that. So there are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major shapes. So you have compact. The biggest issue with this is, honestly, most people think that compact means small, but it's just a shape. Like usually it's a circle. It has a government in the center of the state. It has highways connecting the government to the other cities. It's basically, okay, here, I'll use this coaster as an example. Because I can't draw things on these PowerPoints, sadly. So this is going to be Poland, which is one of the classic examples of a compact state. So we can have the government of Poland, the capital, Krakow, right in the center of the circle here. But then there are also cities like Warsaw. I actually don't know what the capital of Poland is. I hope it's Krakow. Then we have cities like Warsaw over here, or the city where Auschwitz was. I always forget the name over here. But from this capital city right here, we have highways connecting to these places and these cities. So it's not usually a big state, but usually it's a small or medium-sized state with a circular shape, a capital in the middle, and highways connecting the capital to all of the other major cities in the country. I hope that helped you understand compact more than it confused you. We also have fragmented states. The biggest example of this is the Philippines or Indonesia. The territory is broken up into many different islands and pieces. Technically, the U.S. is a fragmented state because we have the continental 48 states, but then we also have Alaska and Hawaii. I would not usually choose the U.S. as an example for a fragmented state, but it technically is. It's broken up into different pieces. And then elongated means that it's a really stretched out, really thin state. So think of Chile, Thailand, Vietnam. These are all tiny little stretched out long states. Elongated. They're tiny little thin states. Please remember to stop me if you have any questions. Then we also have a prorupt state. So for that one, you can think of places like Italy. It's where it's going to have a big base, but then it's going to have like a thin elongated into it. So here you can really think of Thailand, maybe even Vietnam, because it has that one little bulb at the top and then it has an elongated shape. So Italy, at the top near Milan and Florence, it has a big bulb, but then it stretches out into like the boot, right? We always think of Italy as a boot and has the big base at the top. So that's an example of a prorupt state. And then a perforated state is where it has holes. So usually you think of South Africa for this because it has Lesotho and Eswatini just right in the middle of it. Those Eswatini and Lesotho are actually examples of countries that formed because their nations were different, but it also formed because of colonialism. So you can see how like the shapes of states really connect to their history, about their colonial history and their national identities. So if you want to learn more about that, I would definitely consider like Googling it, learning about why South Africa has random countries in the middle of it. It's actually kind of interesting to learn. And then a landlocked state is a state that's just, it's not bordering any oceans or any seas. So Kansas is not a country, but think of places like Kansas or Switzerland, Austria. They're not on the border of any oceans. They're landlocked. All four sides are surrounded by land. And then we have boundary disputes. This really should have gone before territorial morphology, but I didn't think about it until after. So boundary disputes. So when we have these boundaries, international boundaries usually, we get these places like the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, right? So what that means is that there are different disputes, fights, wars fought over who gets what boundary. Like the U.S.-Mexican War, the Texas-Mexican War, they were only fought over 30 miles of land where the border between Texas and Mexico should go when it seceded from Mexico. Should it go at the Rio Grande, which is where Texas thought that it should go, and Mexico thought that it should go 30 miles north. So we basically started a war over a 30-mile piece of land just because of its boundary. So that would be called a definitional boundary dispute, the Texas or U.S.-Mexican War. So that boundary dispute would be that two countries thought that their boundary was in a different place. So they just fought a war over it. It doesn't even have to be a war. It can just be like there was a diplomatic peace talk or something between where the two borders are. Or it can just be that they just don't understand. They're confused sometimes. A locational boundary dispute is when the border moves. So basically when usually a river dries up, like between India and Bangladesh on the Ganges River in the 1900s, it was dried up. So we couldn't use that river as a boundary anymore, like a safe stopping place. Like people could actually cross over it now into the other country. So they had to move the boundaries. So they were deciding over where the location of it was. Operational boundaries are when the borders are agreed to, but there's like passage is a problem. So, I mean, for that one, you can just think of, I guess, the U.S.-Mexico border. So there are always different policies with different presidents over immigration, like who can cross over the border when. There's also operational border disputes going on right now in Europe. The EU, the European Union, is a supranational organization. That's a vocab word that you need to know. And the supranational organization of the EU has decided that all the countries that are members, they don't have border policies. Driving between the countries is just like driving between states, or flying is just like flying between states in the United States. You don't need a passport. You don't have to have a border check once you go in between each country. It can just be like driving through the state. Oh, you see a sign. Welcome to France. Bye-bye, Switzerland. And you just keep driving, right? But now with the coronavirus concerns, the some countries in the EU have decided to close their borders. So now some business in Europe can't get done because people don't bring their passports. There are no real regulations, but border security guards and national armies in Europe are stopping people from crossing into countries because they don't want them to transmit the coronavirus. So that's an operational boundary dispute because they agreed that their borders would be open. They would not be closed, it would just be a sign welcome to France, you're out of Switzerland. But now France has closed their borders because they've gone on lockdown. So there are now border guards at all the road crossings into France, not letting people in. The EU is mad about this because they have their policies to make sure that people can go between their countries, the member countries, but now they can't. And the last type of boundary dispute is allocational. This one is usually about natural resources. It's usually about fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil. We see this one a lot in the Middle East because there are some random seas like the Mediterranean Sea, the Ural Sea, the Caspian Sea, and the Caucasus region. When we find natural resources in these places, all of these countries say, oh, no, my country belongs to the sea because we have a tiny piece of our border that touches it, so it's ours now. So they're trying to steal the resources that come along borders to decide who gets it. Also, between the U.S. and Mexico, there's a dispute about the Colorado River, which is over in Arizona, California, New Mexico area, Arizona, California area that goes down into Mexico. So who can trap the water? So who can take the water for drinking water from the Colorado River? I don't know. We still haven't decided that between the U.S. and Mexico. The UN Law of the Sea. So the UN Law of the Sea is not the most important thing to learn in political geography. You just need to know that it's there. Basically, for the first few miles, it's sovereign country territory. For the next few miles, the country can extract natural resources, and after about 200 miles, it's the high seas. There are no laws. It's international waters. So basically, it has to deal with oceans. This was a big concern for the Caribbean a few decades ago. The UN passed the Law of the Sea in 1982, I believe, and they wanted to make sure that countries' sovereignty along their borders to the oceans were still intact, so countries could do business in these places. And you'll learn more about things like exclusive economic zones from the UN Law of the Sea when you get to Unit 7 if you haven't gotten there already. Online learning is really taking a toll on some teachers, they can't push out information to their students like they used to. So if you have any questions, ask me. That's what I'm here for until 12 Dallas time or 10 a.m. Washington time. I don't know where you're from, Val, so can't tell you about your time zone, Valeria. So political geography continued. We have supranationalism, just like I said, it's a big vocab word. So that's basically when a ton of countries get together and say, you know what, let's form an alliance, or let's form a pact, or let's have a conference together. So some big examples of supranationalism are UN, the United Nations, which has 242 member countries, the EU, which encompasses a lot of Western Europe and some Eastern European territories, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and I have an interesting story about that, OPEC, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and then the IMF, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So the UN was created after World War II for countries to basically get together and have a global leadership of the world, to make laws that were safe to prevent wars like that from breaking out again. And the EU was formed also after World War II to make sure that its member countries allowed for the Eurozone for the first part, which was an economic reason for supranationalism if you look at the three reasons underneath those names. And then it was also formed for trade reasons. It would be a free trade zone, the Eurozone. So they all use the same currency and they could all trade within the borders just like it was within the US. Making a big one European state was the goal of the EU. OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So what that means is most of the countries in the Middle East, and I also believe Russia, are a member of OPEC. It's about 13 member countries that control all of the oil and petroleum in the world. Besides the US is not a member of OPEC, even though we have a substantial petroleum reserve off of our South Atlantic and Gulf Coast. So these OPEC countries decide the prices of oil from the Middle Eastern and Russian territories, and they also decide who they can sell the oil to. So let's just be glad that the U.S. has not been told that we can't buy oil because we're not a member of OPEC right now. We've never been a member of OPEC. I actually do not know why, but let's just be glad that they haven't thought to use OPEC against us if they ever try to start a war. Then we can have no more gasoline for our cars. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This one is formed for military and trade. NATO was formed for military, and NAFTA was formed for trade and economics. So NATO is basically the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance of multiple countries from US, Canada, and Western Europe after World War II to say, you know what, we've got each other's backs if something ever happens. Our militaries will all work together. If anybody ever declares war on one country, they declare war on all countries. I think that the slogan for NATO is war on one of us is war on all of us. And there are about 22 member countries from US, Canada, Mexico, Western Europe. NAFTA often gets confused with NATO, but it's an economic and trade, the North American Free Trade Act. So NAFTA is not a thing anymore. It was struck in 2016 or 2017, I believe, but basically it did allow for free trade in Mexico, Canada, and the US across the borders. So the borders would allow for free trade and free currency conversion. Basically, this was struck because the US decided we were at a huge trade surplus with Mexico and Canada, and they need to be paying us to receive our goods, the export tariff taxes. And you'll learn more about things like NAFTA in Unit 7 with economics, development, and industrialization. And then the IMF is the World Bank International Monetary Fund. And that one is it's just a big bank that controls all the money in the world, and they give loans to like developing countries. Whenever they say that like our country is in $2.2 trillion of debt, it's usually debt to the World Bank or debt to like ourselves. It's really, talking about national debt is a weird thing because who do we actually pay this money to? Like the World Bank is just an idea. So like whenever we're talking about striking the national debt, like what are we actually talking about doing? Like there has to be a real plan besides just that phrase. And then the last and most important topic of political geography, in my opinion, is de-evolution. So de-evolution was a shocker last year. On the AP exam, there was this big, nasty de-evolution FRQs. On the human geography exam, I believe you get 3 FRQs you have to write. This one was all about de-evolution. It's a minor topic in human geography, and we had a whole FRQ on it. Half the students didn't know what to write. Thank goodness my teacher watched CNN 10 every day in class. If you don't know what CNN 10 is, big shout out to Carla Zeus. But Google CNN 10 and watch it. It's such a meme. But de-evolution is basically when state and local governments get power from the federal government, or basically they steal power from the federal government. What the AP exam asked us to write about was in Spain and the Catalonia region in Barcelona, how they want to become an independent state from Spain. They also asked about Nigeria. And basically they were like, okay, what is de-evolution? How is it working in these countries? Pick a region of these countries that is having de-evolution and explain how it's happening. And everybody was like, and I was like, Carla Zeus, CNN 10. But basically, there's also de-evolution going on all the time, and I'm surprised the AP exam didn't ask about this one. In the United Kingdom, the UK, Scotland is trying to act like its own self-governing territory separate from the United Kingdom, the Great Britain. They are having more and more laws put in place where they have all the power. They're actually starting to get more power than the government in London is, because they're getting all of these rights from de-evolution, all of these powers in their, I guess it would be a provincial constitution for Scotland. It's interesting. If you want to look up what de-evolution is, there's actually a lot of articles about it online. All right, so our next unit that we're going to cover is population migration. This one is a little bit more straightforward than political geography, a lot less content at least. And this is our second to last unit. Oh, a question. I'm sure it's about political geography, so I'll go back to that. Could you briefly explain some of those? So T asked, could you briefly explain some of those Spain and Nigeria de-evolution examples? So honestly, I do not know what the devolution from Nigeria was. I chose not to write about that. I personally wrote about Spain, and I can explain that in a second. I don't really know what's going on in Nigeria. Like I had no clue when I saw that picture. I was like, Nigeria, devolution? Question mark. But for Spain, basically, there's this autonomous region of the country now called Catalonia. And Catalonia, let me see if I can try to find you guys a map. But Catalonia is in the northwest part of the country. It encompasses Barcelona. Oh my God, that was such a bad pronunciation. Catalonia contains Barcelona, which is like one of the like biggest tourism places in Spain. Like a ton of people go there. Let me see if I can share my tabs with you right here. So the Catalonia region of Spain right here has been trying to gain independence from the central government in Madrid for a long time for Spain. They're trying because they have their own language, they have their own culture, they have their own they actually have their own slightly different form of government from the Madrid government in Spain. And if I can Google a Catalonia de-evolution article for you, basically, de-evolution happens for two main reasons. It either happens because there's a disconnect between a state and the central government, like their laws aren't affecting them, like the laws aren't helping them, they have problems that aren't solved, or it can happen for cultural reasons. Basically, the cultural reasons are my culture is completely different than yours, and you're making laws based on your culture, and my culture can't like practice this religion freely, or it can't. My culture isn't helped by your laws. So there's been all of these protests. In 2016, there was a big referendum vote that apparently, according to the government in Madrid, barely did not pass. So really, I'm thinking that it did pass, but the government in Madrid is trying to like keep global stability and like not let Catalonia be its own country. But you can see right here, like all of these pictures of all these protests from Catalonia, because like Catalonia is not Spain. It has their own culture. It has their own people actually. Like they identify as their own person. You can see here, like this referendum result from 2012 that wasn't recognized by the UN. 89.3% voted yes to separate from Spain. Like, that's really weird. And there are, I believe, 16 states, provinces in Spain, and Catalonia makes up 20% of the GDP, really just because of all of their tourism. Like, they have so much tourism to Barcelona, and they have beautiful, like, beach island resorts over here. But they've been trying to gain independence from Spain just because of their culture, and the disconnect that they feel between Madrid is really why they've been trying to gain independence from Spain. So I hope that helped explain some examples of de-evolution in Spain, and from Catalonia. If it didn't, put something in the comments, questions again, and I'll try to help you. Back to the PowerPoint slides. So now I'm going to move on to talking about the population and migration. So for population migration, it's a lot more straightforward than political geography. There's not as much jibber jabber. There's not as much concept that you need to know one thing about. It's knowing more about less. So it's depth, not breadth. So what that means is there are a few things, but you need to know a lot about those things. So push and pull factors. So this is pretty easy to explain. Push is what pushes you away from something. Pulls is what pulls you into something. So a push factor can be that there's a war going on in the country, and a push and pull factor is what causes immigration or emigration. So I'm going to connect push and pull factors. I'm sorry, the pointer's not working. Push and pull factors right up here, all the way down to immigration versus emigration. So a push factor could cause someone to emigrate from a country because it's pushing them away. Like the government isn't making laws that help them, they're unemployed. But then a pull factor could be that I have a job in another country, and that could cause me to immigrate to another place. That's why a lot of people immigrate from Mexico to the U.S. because they can't find work. So a pull factor from the U.S. to Mexico would be there's job openings, there's more political stability. But then a push factor from Mexico for coming to the U.S., which would cause you to emigrate from Mexico, could be that there's political instability, the war on drugs, deaths. I can't find a job here, so I could push you away from Mexico and pull you into the United States. If that doesn't make sense, put something in the comments. The next thing is population density. There are two main types of population density that you need to know for the AP exam. If they put another kind of population density on there, let me give you a hint. It's the wrong answer. There was a question about like which population density is shown in this chart. And they put like arable land population density and all these like other random words that are real kinds of population density, but you only need to know these two for the AP exam. These two will be the only right answers. So arithmetic, it's basically pretty simple. It divides the amount of people by the amount of land. It's how many people are there per square mile of land in this country. Physiological density has to deal with arable land, which is land that could be used for farming. So this one gives a more accurate picture of what's the carrying capacity, or how much people can this country sustain with its current land area. So this physiological density divides the number of people by the amount of arable land in the country. Again, not as complicated as political geography. And then we also have the demographic transition model. The demographic transition model is one of the most confusing things from the population unit. Basically, when a country progresses through the demographic transition model from stage 1 all the way to stage 4, what's happening is they're becoming more industrialized and more advanced. You really don't need to know anything besides stage 1. The birth and death rates are high. The population of a country is pretty low. But then once you go through the different demographic transition model, your birth rates and death rates start to fall until you experience zero population growth. Once you get to stage 5, you're experiencing negative population growth. So stage 1, high birth and death rates. Stage 4, 5, low birth and death rates, almost zero natural increase. And then we have the debate between Thomas Malthus and Esther Boserup. You've probably heard of Thomas Malthus in your classes, I hope. But he was the person who said that human population grows exponentially, which means that it's a J curve, but our population for food can only grow linearly, which is in a straight line, geometrically. So he said the human population will sometime outgrow the food supply. But Esther Boserup is the one who said, well, we keep coming up with things like the Green Revolution and new technology that allows us to do things like urban farming, and we are having to stop food deserts. Like we can grow things in urban areas, plant rooftop gardens. So human innovation will cause food production to be growing exponentially soon. So basically, Thomas Malthus is the pessimist saying, yeah, no, we're all going to die someday. And Esther Boserup's like, no, we can come up with innovation and technology to help fuel our new world and help to make sure that we can have exponential population growth and exponential food growth, and hopefully slow that population growth as we progress through the demographic transition model, connecting those two ideas. And then the next major thing from population and migration is equations. So basically, here you're just going to be like subtracting birth rates, death rates, adding birth rates, death rates, immigration rates. This is where all of those things come into play. So when you have these equations here, the most important ones that you'll have to know are crude birth and death rate, which means the crude birth rate is the number of births per 1,000 people in the country. The crude birth rate of the U.S. right now, I believe, is 8-ish. The crude death rate of our country is about 10-ish. No. Our crude death rate is about, our crude birth rate is about 10-ish, and our crude death rate is about 8-ish. Notice I'm using ish at the end of all those words. So that's about a stable stage 4 crude birth rate, crude death rate. Also you need to know the total fertility rate. A replacement level fertility rate is 2.1. So the total fertility rate is how many babies a woman of childbearing age will have in her lifetime. So you can understand the 2 from that, right? There are 2 parents that procreate, and whenever they die, they have to leave 2 children to replace them, right? That makes sense, but where does the 0.1 come in? So if we only replaced each individual once in our population, that means that we would only have the same amount of people. We would have zero population growth. Our population across all of the world would remain constant. But we see that the crude birth rate is higher than the crude death rate in the United States right now. And what happens, why the total fertility rate is 2.1, is that we're having people who are making 3 babies, but some people are only having 1 baby. So we need to make sure that we have a stable amount of people. We need to have a growing population to be able to have a growing world with more ideas. So the total fertility rate replacement level is 2.1 to replace you, your parents, and every few people you're going to replace another person to have a stable, growing population. Infant and child just forget net migration rate. Like that's just like immigration versus immigration. Like there's not really going to be a lot of numbers involved. Basically, if you don't know what the question is asking about, using crude birth rate, net migration rate, just add, subtract, do something that gets you to one of the multiple choice answers is my best recommendation for you. And closer to the AP exams, Fiveable is opening up a thing called the Cram Pass, where I think you can pay like $25 and you get access to like a ton of different live streams that go through and review like each unit individually and spend an hour going through all of the topics. I'm just like kind of scratching the surface right now on all of these units. Like if you did this for every unit on the human geography exam, you could probably get a good 3. But if you attend all those sessions and do all of my study tips, you can get a 5. So moving on. The infant mortality rate is anything under 1-year-old that dies. The child mortality rate is anything between 1 year old and 5 years old that dies. It's just like the death rate, but it's for special categories. The rate of natural increase is probably the most important. It's just crude birth rate minus crude death rate over 1,000. That's the only really equation that you really need to memorize. Crude birth rate minus crude death rate, or it could be birth rate minus death rate over 10. The last topic for population, and I have one more to share with you. Oh, no, that moved on to culture, is voluntary versus involuntary migration. So voluntary migration is when I choose to move somewhere, involuntary is when I'm forced. So involuntary migration could be the slave trade. Voluntary migration is I see a better job opportunity in the US, so I'll move to the United States. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is population pyramids. If I could find a good picture of a population pyramid to show you guys. So population pyramids basically just compare the different number of people alive in different age groups at a certain time. I'm trying to see if I can find a picture of a population pyramid to share with you, but it does not look like this book is going to let me. Okay, loading, give me, oh, perfect. Population pyramids. So I hope you can see that. But basically, you just need to look at it. You can see what percentage of the population on the x-axis is made up by which age group on the y-axis. On the left side is usually going to be female, and on the right side is usually going to be male. They're sometimes called age-sex structure diagrams on the AP exam. But anything that looks like a triangle, if you can see this, I hope my lighting is not too bad. It's just going to be a very growing population. Anything that looks like a triangle, but also kind of looks like a pentagon, is going to be like stage 2, stage 3 of the demographic transition model. Anything that looks like straight up and down like a square right here or a rectangle is going to be stage 4. Anything that looks like this, like a really weird, like really long pentagon, is going to be like stage 5, like negative population growth. Like we have more old people than young people. Population pyramids are kind of confusing, so I'm not going to go into all of those details now, but just know that they exist and how to read them. The last thing that we're going to review is, what is culture? That's a really broad question. Oh, it looks like we've got a new person joining us. So hello to Solora. If you have any questions, put them in the Ask a Question section or in the comments, and we're going to be reviewing the last unit that we have chosen to do today, which is culture. I hope that's what you need. So culture, what is culture? Basically, culture is like your nation. It's what you do, what you identify with, who your family is, what religion you practice. It's basically everything that makes you, besides like your biology and your DNA and stuff. Don't worry about that. Culture is what makes you, you. What makes you, you. All right. So some vocab words. Cultural syncretism. Basically, that means we're mixing up cultures to make new cultures. So we blend African cultures and Caribbean cultures in the slave trade when people go work on sugar plantation. Boom, we have a new culture called Afro-Caribbean culture. Afro-Cuban. It's genres of music, styles of religion, what they practice. It's basically just putting two cultures together and blending them up. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a question. Yes, I'll answer your question when I'm done with culture. So religion, this is one of the big overarching themes of culture. I'm going to barely scratch the surface. Like, this is not going to be the best culture review you've ever seen. I promise you, this will probably be like average. Religion. So there are, in the worst order that I probably could have put them in, 3 Abrahamic religions like I talked about earlier. We've got Christianity, we've got Islam, and we've got Judaism. So the one that came first was Judaism. Abraham, which is where Abrahamic religions came along, and he was walking around Jerusalem. He's like, I know God. And so we started a religion when he died. The next one that came along was Christianity. Jesus came to earth and said, I am the final messenger of God. Praise. Well, he didn't really do that. He said, I am the King of Kings. I come from God. I know him. I am his son. And then when he died on the cross, we started a religion. And then Islam was when Muhammad was born. He was like, no, I'm the final prophet. And God tells me that his real name is Allah, which is just God in Arabic. So basically, when some prophet dies, we start a religion. That's how Abrahamic religions work. Judaism was started from Abraham. Christianity was started from Jesus. And Islam was started from Muhammad. Islam started around, I think, 4000 BCE. I'm sure, actually, no, it didn't. I'm sorry, I think it started around 1000 BCE or 2000 BCE. Christianity started at 0 AD, which is why it's 0 AD, 0 Ad Domino, which just means kind of like after the death of Christ, I believe. And then Islam started around 632 AD, which is which is the year when the Prophet Muhammad died. Spencer asked if I can explain the difference between Shia and Sunni Islam. Sure. So after Muhammad died in 632, there were people who, so in Saudi Arabia, Persia, in Arabia, what we called it at that time, Arabia, he died in Mecca, which is the holy land that most Islamic people claim. So people decided, and he started a place called Medina, which is where he took his pilgrimage, the Hajj, from Medina to Mecca. If you don't know any of these words, like, don't ask me. This is really like in-depth, like, overview of Islam. So Muhammad took his pilgrimage from Mecca to Medina to start his holy city. And he came back to Mecca, to the Holy Land, with his army, and he didn't die from battle, but he just died. So people were like, oh, Muhammad is like this king of Mecca and Medina and this Hajj and this Hijrah. What are we going to do when he dies? So there was fighting over who should be his successor. So Sunnis, which is the 80% of people who are Islam are Sunnis, believe that the real successor was his first successor. I don't know what his name is, and you probably couldn't get it out of me if you tried to beat it out of me in an interrogation. I really don't remember. But then the Shia Islamics thought that his real successor was the one who was fourth in line. Don't know what his name was. So the Sunni is the majority and the Shia is the minority. Most Shia or Shiite, as they're referred to in human geography, but in AP World and AP Euro, they're referred to as Shia. So don't know why the College Board did that. So Shia or Shiite, Muslims or Shia Islamic people, Muslims live mostly in Iran and Iraq, but Sunnis live all over the world in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Bangladesh and India. Those are mostly Sunni areas, but Shias are mostly in Iran and Iraq. Yeah, I hope that explains Sunni and Shia Islam. Basically, they had a debate over who the successor of Muhammad was. And then we have the other religions. The oldest religion is Hinduism. Well, we're not counting this last one. So I'll talk about animistic. This one takes 2 seconds. Basically, people thought that trees, stones, inanimate objects, or living plants were worth worshiping, and there were like sun gods. Shamanistic people are also known as animistic people. They worship like the sun, plants, trees, stones, rocks, the beauty of nature. They don't have a god. They just like worship things. I'm not 100% clear on how it works, but welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream, Shreya. But if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments or in the ask a question section. We're onto the culture unit right now. So the next oldest, which is really the oldest, is Hinduism. It was started in India. So this Prince Siddharth was like, why are we doing this? Like, we're doing a bunch of bad things in India. We're killing people. No. So basically, he was the Brahmin, and he was like, yeah, no, we got to start this religion. Like, it's really not more simple than that. You need to know that Hinduism is the oldest religion, and it comes from Prince Siddharth, the Brahmin, in India, a long time ago. For Buddhism, you need to know that it was this guy named Buddha who wanted to find the middle way. He was all about living the simple life, helping others, but also not like being poor. So there was being poor, and then there was being extravagantly rich. He wanted to find the middle path that suited all people, the golden way. He tried to model his religion off of Hinduism, but without the caste system. You also need to know that Hinduism has the strict caste system that you can't move in. And then like you're reincarnated. Karma, nirvana, reincarnation are beliefs of Hinduism and Buddhism. And those are the major religions that you need to know for the AP Human Geography exam. Now let's move on to languages. Languages are like the weirdest topic in AP Human Geography. Like, you kind of need to know that it's a thing, but you also don't like need to know a lot about it. So you know that there's a thing called the language tree, which is that all languages originated from the same language, and then they started these families, and there were groups of smaller languages, and then there are languages that we have today. So right now I am speaking English. English is a part of the group from the family, the Indo-European language family. It's the largest language family. It also encompasses German. But then there are also other languages families that encompass French, Spanish, Italian. They're in the Romance group. And English, Latin, German are all in the something group from the Indo-European family. The linguistic region is basically just like the region where your language is spoken. So the linguistic region for Arabic could be the Middle East. It could be Eastern Africa, where Swahili is not spoken in the Arabic Muslim communities. The linguistic region for Mandarin Chinese would probably be China. The linguistic region for English is almost all over the world now. It's such a globalized language. But really in England, the US, Australia, those are the major linguistic regions for English. And then you also need to know what a standard and official language is. So a standard language is the language that's mostly spoken by the people of a country. So the standard language of the United States would be English. But official language is like what the language that it says the Constitution in the country is going to be. So the United States actually has no official language. We've just always been interpreted off of our standard language, which is English. People have always just believed that English is going to be our standard language. So basically, the English people, when they came to America, they brought their language of English over here. So then that then became our standard language. So lingua franca is just the language that you do trade in. It's a fancy word for saying that's the language that we do business in this country. So if you were having a conversation between a French person and a Swiss person, your lingua franca would probably be French, since that's a language that's spoken in both countries. It's common. But usually when you come from America and do business in China, even though you speak English in America, you're expected to speak Mandarin in China because it's customary with their usual beliefs. So you're going to be speaking Mandarin when you do business in China. And then we're on to acculturation versus assimilation. So assimilation is when you come to a country, like I come from Mexico to the United States, and I'm expected to assimilate to their culture. So I give up some of my cultural heritage and beliefs to practice the culture in the United States. I assimilate and throw my cultures into the pot. Some people practice them, but I really am now a member of this country. Acculturation is more of the process of throwing your culture into the pot and hoping that it becomes the dominant culture of an area. Race versus ethnicity. It's just a topic you need to know. You need to know race is Race is a construct. It's not determined. Race is technically not determined by the color of your skin. Race is a self-determined construct based on how you feel about yourself, and ethnicity has to do more with your family's history, nationality, your family tree. Globalization, so the globalization of culture. So that means that popular culture has become the dominant culture. No matter what popular culture is, what music we listen to, that means that the popular culture is going to be the dominant culture. So we have popular culture versus folk culture. So folk culture is like the original, like old language of an area, but the popular culture is like the culture that's diffused all the way from New York to Milan. Like fashion culture could be a popular culture from New York and Milan, but the folk culture from a place like Sweden could be that they eat Swedish meatballs. I don't know, that might have been very racist and xenophobic, but that's the best thing that I could come up with right now. I'm tired. So globalization just means that popular culture is going to be the dominant culture, and folk culture is always going to lose in a battle with popular culture, because popular culture is by definition more popular. Racism is not really a concept that you need to know for the exam. I don't know why it's in this outline. Some people believe that their race is better. What usually, I guess why it's on here is racism usually gets construed as when anybody uses their race at all, or like says, I'm white, so I believe this. But racism is really only just when you decide that you are better than somebody else because of the race that you identify with. That's really what it is. You need to know for the AP exam that race is a construct, and racism is when you identify with something and you think that you're better just because of your race. So now I'm going to answer any questions. If your teacher needs something for you being present in the stream, please comment, and I can put your name in the spreadsheet to send to my boss. So I know somebody asked this. So Spencer asked, totally unrelated, but can you go over meta city? Spencer, I don't really know what a meta city is. Are you referring to a mega city? Put in the comments if you're asking about a mega city, because I don't really know what a meta city is. You want meta city or mega city? So I don't know what a metacity is. It is not on the course and exam description for human geography, which means that they're not going to test it on the AP exam. So I don't really know how to answer your question. I'm sorry. You can ask your teacher for more information if that's where you got this from. But oh, okay. A metacity is a conurbanation with a population of more than 20 million people. Perfect. Sorry. Thank you, Shia. I did not know that. So a metacity is a city with a population of over 20 million. It's a new term. I guess that's why I did it. It's on the CD now. I did a recent stream on it. Oh, I guess I'm looking at something that's outdated. Thank you. All right. So if you have any other lingering questions, I will try to answer those. That's been the first question that I've not been able to answer in human geography so far. But a mega city, like I was referring to, is a city with a population of over 10 million people, if you were wondering about that. So mega city is 10 million, meta city is 20 million. If you have any more questions, put them in the comments, but I think I'm going to close out the stream now. So as always, follow Think Thriveable on all social media platforms, and have a great rest of your day. And I hope you stay safe from the coronavirus, guys. Since you guys are still here, I can still take questions in the comments. I'll be active for 1 or 2 more minutes, so just make sure you type it out before then, before I end the broadcast. All right, I think I'm going to end the broadcast now then. Have a great day, guys.